like murders and stuff. He loves to solve those. That's too intense for me. Too much blood and he was an atheist till he was 35 years old. Now he's talking about why he's a Christian and how he knows that. That's just too cool. And yeah, just one awesome thing that I don't think we can like mistake or not talk on. You can snap it to bits. So would you please give a round of applause for Jim.
I'm probably not going to use a microphone, so you're going to have to kind of listen to my big boy voice, okay? Thanks everyone for coming. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here. I came from California. I was here at a church over the week. And so I got a chance to stay up here and see you guys. I drove up from Sioux Falls. So thanks for having me. I wanted to share a little bit of the journey that I went through. And you know, we spent time singing and worshiping. Like we tried to a couple times the first worship song, right? I was just not committed to that song for some reason. But now we're going to switch a little bit. And typically when we think of worship, we think of it in terms of kind of an emotional process, like singing and worship. But really, I think of it also worship as something with your mind. And so I want to stretch you for the next few minutes to stretch you out and to worship God with your mind. To understand that there's actually more than just a feeling about this. There's some good reasons to believe this is true, not just because we like it and we want it to be true, because whether we like it or not, it is true. And I was somebody who was a real not angry. I was angry. I was angry with my friends who were cops, who had such a high regard for evidence in their professional life, but they didn't care a lick about evidence in their spiritual life. And I would ask them questions as an atheist, and they couldn't give me answers. And I thought, how can you be so over the top about evidence in our work, but when it comes to the most important questions in life, you don't give a lick about evidence. You don't even have any good answers. That always bothered me. Now, I was not raised around Christians. I don't have any Christians in my family. My dad's an atheist. He's still an atheist, but he's not an angry atheist. He's just kind of out on the carry. And I wrote this book, right? I wrote a book last year, and I gave it to my dad, and I said to my dad, it was a divorce from my mom when I was very young, that became my friends. And I said, hey, did you read my book? So then I started it. I said, dude, your son wrote a book. You can't read your son's book? Who doesn't read their son's book? I said, how do you know I haven't written something really bad about you in there? Why not? You should read it to make sure I didn't write anything bad about you. So I think I'm going to need a deathbed conversion. I'm going to need like a battlefield conversion. Someday I'll think, dude, you're 73 years old, you've had a stroke. We're at a rib joint and barbecue joint in Jefferson, Texas. We're having this conversation. And you're 73 years old, you already had one stroke. You're eating ribs, you can stroke it out right in front of me right now. I mean, okay, anyway, I'll show you this guy. I think he's pretty interesting. I've worked as a cop for 25 years, and I've been working in nothing but cold case homicides for the last 12. Those are hard to solve. These are open homicides because there's no statute of limitations. They never close them. And so 30 years later, if it's still open, we need to work the case. And a lot of things that are similar about working homicides that are open will actually give you this good skill set to look at any ancient event and make decisions about whether those folks are telling you the truth or not. Now, this is my dad when I was a kid. This is me when I was a kid. I was born in his academy. I grew up around cops. He hired on the police department in 1961. We've got the same name. We're not very creative, like George Foreman of law enforcement. You know George Foreman's got 6 boys, right? And they're all named George Foreman. It's kind of weird, isn't it? George 1, George 2, George 3. So we have kind of the same thing. My dad has my name, my son has my name, we all have the same name. But I was born in his academy. I got a chance to go through high school, and I thought I would be a cop. And then I thought, nah, that's kind of lame. I'm going to go ahead and do something in the arts. So I spent 9 years in art school in architecture. I got my master's degree at UCLA. I thought I was going to be an architect. I call it architecture now. That's exactly what it felt like. I felt like I was like a bull in a china shop. I could not get comfortable in that profession. So by the time I was 27, I was back in the police academy. And I've been there ever since. Now, when you first start working in law enforcement, you're stuck in patrol. It's a good thing, but you're working in a patrol car. You're just responding to calls. I spent 2 years working gangs. That was a lot of fun too. We're in Los Angeles County, South Central Los Angeles. So you get to see a lot of crazy things down there. And then after that, I spent a few years working SWAT, which is fine. You can jump off buildings, shoot at people. And then I spent several years working undercover, where I cut your hair for 4 years. That's cool. Do you know, when I had my hair this length, I moved into a new house, not a new house, but a new neighborhood for me. And I had a neighbor across the street. And I was there probably about 3 years with that long hair, and I eventually grew a goatee. I grew a goatee because in my son's kindergarten class, when I would go to his class, he would see all the pictures of parents that the kids would draw. And my son would draw a picture of his parents, who both look exactly the same. And so I said, you know, I'm going to grow a goatee just so the pictures look different. So anyway, but my neighbor didn't even talk to me until I got out of that job and started in detectives. And when I cut my hair, this neighbor finally talked to me. He came across the street and actually introduced himself to me. That's kind of lame. And we have a restaurant there called Claim Jumper. Do you have that here? It's this big restaurant chain. I remember I used to go to this Claim Jumper and they would not seat me. I could wait forever. I'd see people coming after me and they would get seated. And it was all because I had really big goatee and this long hair and nobody wanted to see me at this point. But you do this to everybody else. You learn a lesson about how to treat people, I guess. When I cut my hair, I started to work in robbery homicide. And that detail does, I was in charge of every robbery that occurred in our city. Because undercover, I had watched a lot of robberies. When I was working undercover, we would work career criminals. So we would get half a license plate and work it up and figure out what we think the car is. We'd go out in the neighborhood and we'd sit on that car. And we'd wait. You'd go out and score heroin all week long. And finally, when he ran out of money, he'd go do a robbery. And we'd be watching him while he's doing it. And we'd take him to jail right afterwards. So I had a lot of experience with robberies. So they put me in this detail, and I eventually started working in robbery homicide. I was responsible for all the robberies in every 6th homicide in our town. Then I started working cold cases, unsolved. We had 30 back in 1996 when I first started doing this. So these cases get national attention because they're unusual. So our cases have been on national TV quite a few times. We've been on Dayline 3 times. We have a 4th case coming up, and I've been on Court TV and Fox News, those kinds of things, because they're weird cases that don't solve. But you learn a lot of cool things. Now, during a lot of this time, I was not a believer, and I really wasn't interested. And I thought that Christians were pretty, but to be honest, pretty stupid, because they never had any good answers on my questions anymore. And it seemed like I had done more research than they had, and I was just done with it. But my wife, if she wanted to go to church, I'd be happy to go. As an atheist, just don't, expect anything from me. I'll be happy to go sit with you. My dad did that his entire life. Just continues to do that. And so I thought, okay, I'll go. And this first time I sat in a church where there was actually live worship, and I've been in churches for funerals and weddings, doing a lot of Catholic masses. But I was sitting in an evangelical church, and the pastor interested me in Jesus just enough, selfishly, because I had read the work of Allah, I read the work of Buddha. So I was interested in Jesus just as an ancient sage. That's it. Nothing more. Not interested in the whole God thing. But as I read through the Gospels to get the red letters about my first Bible, I became intrigued because now I had worked cold cases for a number of years and investigations for a number of years, and I was used to reading eyewitness accounts and trying to figure out, is that guy lying? And so now I was reading the Gospels as an eyewitness account, and I started to really evaluate them. The template I'm going to share with you tonight. And it changed the way I read the Gospels. And I was just looking at it from the perspective of eyewitness reliability. I was convinced that the Gospels were reliable before I really ever understood what the Gospel was. So I kind of came at it that way. Didn't expect really to be interested. I'm going to share with you a little bit of the journey. So now I get to go around the country and speak to groups about some of the things I've learned as a cold case detective. This is my last day. I'm now a consultant. I work about part-time with my agency, so I can travel to school. But the last full-time day I had, I told my sergeant, I said, I'm going to get back in uniform, which I hadn't worn in like 20 years. And I have a lame uniform. It's an old uniform. Polyester, it's terrible. My Sam Brown's all leather. No one wears other Sam Browns anymore. Everyone's wearing, like a tactical Sam Brown, which is very light. Mine's really heavy. But my son, who's now a police officer, who was born in my academy, has my name. He's now working for our agency. So we've had a guy there. If you called that agency, you asked for Jim Wallace on the phone, someone's been answering the phone for 52 years with that name. This guy's going to be there for another 30. It's more of an 80-year run to answer the phone. Here we are working the last day, just handling calls. I said, I just want to get in the car, I just want to be a regular beat car, a want to handle calls with my son all day long. You know, he was like, "What? We gotta get the shooting." I'm like, "You stupid! The idea is to not get injured on your last day at work. Right? It's fine for you. You got to hold it up. But for me, I'm on my last day at work. So, but we drank monsters most of the whole day. Okay, so I want to share with you 3 generations of information. From my son to me and my dad, we've all worked the same job. We've all pretty much had a run at this. And we come out with some different conclusions. Not everyone makes a decision based purely on evidence. There are other factors involved. But I think I can teach you a few things about the 3 generations of law enforcement that I think will be helpful to you. We're just going to jump in right now. Now, look, we're going to cover a bunch of stuff. We're even going to go over the law this morning and out. I hope it'll still be entertaining. But I'm going to send you materials when this is done. Because a lot of stuff we're going to cover, we're only going to touch on briefly because we're a short time tonight. So if you'll sign up on this email, I'll send you 1 email. It'll have a link. You'll be able to download this talk in its entirety on video, plus MP3s, PDF files. They'll actually give you all the information we're talking about tonight. It's going to send it to you. One link, you can download it, use it sometime downstream. Okay? Here we go. This is Richard Dawkins' statement, and the God of which many of us saw religion as harmless nonsense. Beliefs might lack all supporting evidence, but hey, we thought if people need a crutch for consolation, where's the harm? September 11th changed all that. For most people, they're not benign. This type of atheist is like I was. I was not benign about Christians. It wasn't like, oh, it's fine for you. I actually thought Christians were dangerous in some way because they weren't reasonable. And if you're not reasonable, you start to get involved in things that you really can't substantiate. That's dangerous. And he's arguing that folks like this who are fundamentalists, who have no good reason to support what they believe, end up doing things like flying planes into buildings. And from that perspective, all religious fundamentalists have a dangerous attitude because they're not reasoning through the evidence to conclude religion. And I could never accept the Christian worldview if it was not evidentially supported. I just can't do it. I feel like I'm a pretty committed evidentialist. So the question is, do we have any supporting evidence? And does Dawkins even know what supporting evidence would be? So that's the question we're going to talk about tonight. And I think he would say, well, you guys have arguments and you have some philosophical approaches, but you don't really have any evidence. When you think of evidence as, hard, direct, forensic, testable evidence, I don't think Dawkins really knows how to make cases. I'm going to teach you tonight how to make cases. And so you can see we actually have a lot of evidence. It's because folks don't really understand the categories of evidence and how evidence is assembled in a case. They make statements like this because they just don't know how we make cases. So I want to walk you through that process tonight. Really, the whole issue is going to be what qualifies as evidence in the first place so we can use it to make a case. Make sense? So here we go. We're going to start with a little illustration. You're going to be on my jury. We're going to solve this murder together. So you all ready to play? You're all on the jury. You're all sworn in. The murder took place. This is our accused. He has been accused of bludgeoning to death his girlfriend with that baseball bat. We get a case for that. Just beat her until she's not breathing anymore. And so he's accused of this, and then now the question, of course, is if I get him in custody and I start to interview him, do you think I can trust anything he would say to me? Do you think he's likely to tell me, oh yeah, I got angry and I just beat the dogs and all that? No. I don't think so. I don't think he's going to tell me that. He's probably going to lie to me. So I got to come back to some other way. What if I had a witness across the street? A witness who was cutting her roses one morning. And she looks up across the street and she hears an argument. And through the plate glass window across the street, she sees her neighbor, a young lady she's known for many, many years. She grew up in that neighborhood. She is arguing with her boyfriend. She can see it through the plate glass window in the living room across the street. And she sees this, and she says, and I know who she was arguing with because I recognize the boy. This boy grew up in the neighborhood too. I've known him for as long as I've known her. We all grew up in this neighborhood. And they're always arguing together. They've been boyfriend and girlfriend for several years. They're living in her mom's house. And I mean, they're always arguing. And I remember I saw him yelling and screaming, and the next thing I knew, he picked up a baseball bat and he's just swinging it on her. I know it was him. I've known him for years and years. As a matter of fact, I've known him so long. He was wearing the shirt that I gave him for Christmas 2 years ago. Wow. Now, if you could do cross-examination of her and she holds up in court and she's a reliable witness, really, that one witness alone would be pretty damning. It would be pretty tough to overcome that in the trial. This kind of testimony is called direct evidence. And it's really the only form of direct evidence. Direct evidence is simply eyewitness testimony. So judges tell juries this: hey, if somebody comes into court and says, I was outside and it's raining outside, on that basis of that direct testimony, you can conclude that it's raining outside. On the other hand, if someone comes in from outside, they've got a raincoat on, they take their block off their raincoat, they've got an umbrella, and they shake it off, and they put it in the umbrella stand. You can infer from that indirect evidence that it's raining outside. That's indirect evidence, right? Not direct testimony, but indirect evidence. You saw something. Now you could say, well, it's possible though that it's not raining. What if she walked through like a big sprinkler? You walked through a big sprinkler, it was, overflowing. Really? So he knew in advance to put on his raincoat, his umbrella, to let his sprinkler come? It's possible, but it's not reasonable. The most reasonable inference is it's just raining outside. Get it? That's how we make cases. Now it turns out that direct evidence cases are extremely rare. I have never had them. My cases are all made with indirect evidence, also known as circumstantial evidence. And people will say, circumstantial evidence, it's just a circumstantial case. As a matter of fact, the last attorney, this case we had in March, was on Dayline. This guy pled not guilty. We found him guilty. He's now going to jail. But he fought us because he had an attorney look at our case and say to him, it's just a circumstantial case with meetings. Every case is just circumstantial. So first thing I want you to do is get that out of your mind. You think, circumstantial evidence, that's junk. I'm sure someone like Dawkins would say circumstantial evidence is junk, because he doesn't realize that that's pretty much every case. All right, so now let's change it. We're going to put a mask on. Now, our witness can't identify him. She can say, well, it's about the same bill as the boyfriend she has, but I couldn't take for sure it's the boyfriend because he had a mask on. Now, how do I make the case now? Well, I can go and talk to him, knock on his door, ask him, what were you doing yesterday? Tell him the murder. And he gives me an alibi. He says, during that 2-hour period of time, that hour period of time, I was off doing this. So when I go off and check it out, guess what? He was lying to me. He wasn't doing that. He's got a veto alibi. It's not true. So now I got a guy who fits the general description, and he's got a bad alibi. Is he a person of interest, do you think? Why would he lie about his alibi? Now listen, I've had guys lie about their alibi to be innocent. They're just off doing something else they shouldn't be doing. They don't want them messing around their life or whatever, and they don't want anybody to know what they're doing, but they didn't actually do a murder. Okay? So it happens. So I wouldn't say he's guilty yet, but when I did the search warrant on his house, I discovered this very suspicious thing in his room. He's got a baseball bat. Isn't that kind of suspicious? The murderer used a baseball bat. But baseball bats are pretty common, don't you think? By the way, when I do this talk in Canada, I did it for a whole week on a tour of Western Canada. And somebody finally said to me, Jim, by the way, here in Canada, that would be very unusual to have a baseball bat. So I was like, why didn't you tell me that? Okay, so I got back my room and Photoshop it real quick and turned it into a hockey stick. So you have to be careful with the illustration. Okay, so this is kind of a composite of several cases I've worked, so I want you to this is actually one case. So you have this baseball bat, but it turns out this baseball bat in the thick part of the bat right there, it's all dinged up. It's all nicked up. I don't think he's been hitting baseballs with it. He's been hitting something else with it. Make sense? So I do a little forensic test. Is there any blood on it? No blood. You know why? It's been washed in bleach. This guy's got a baseball bat that is washed in bleach. Who does that? Nobody does that. So I've got a bleached baseball bat, a PO alibi, and it's the general description. So one more step. In his search warrant of his house, I discovered a pair of Levi's. And the Levi's have got dirt caked all over them, mud caked all over them. But when I use luminol on the pants, that's a chemical we use to see if there's any body fluids. It also luminescence on certain cleaning detergents. Okay? But I have luminol his pants, and it glows at the knees. Somebody has spot cleaned. He spot cleaned his pants with a detergent. It's not blood. We can't test it's negative. It's not blood. It's just detergent that's been used to spot clean something on his knees. The rest of his pants are still dirty. So what is it he's trying to clean off his knees? He doesn't seem to care about the mud on the pants. He does seem to care about something on his knee. Spot clean pants, bleach bat, fetal alibi. No sign of forced entry. So whoever got in this house either had a way to get in or was let in by the victim. Now, we did the research on it. Only 3 people have a key. the victim's mom whose house it is, and our crazy boyfriend, the suspect who we have in custody. So if three people have a key, he's got one of the keys. Spot clean pants, page put that, video alibi, this is the general description. How many of you folks now think, probably our guy, just raise your hand, not like a little bit, raise your hand. Get this little thing. Wow, okay, fine, let's keep going. Some of you are saying, I'm not going to commit. I'm not going to commit yet because Jim's got all this black space. So let's do that right now. Do an interview with this guy. Really nervous. He admits, you know what? He get fights all the time. Got a crazy relationship. It's always been that way. I smack her around sometimes. It just happens. It's just part of our relationship. Don't mean anything by it. Sometimes she makes me mad. So I smack her. Yesterday I found out she was cheating. Who would cheat on this wonderful guy? And I found out about it, lost my temper. And I smacked her pretty good, several times, in front of her friends. And I did say I was going to kill her. I feared to kill her. But I didn't kill her. I just lost my temper. The witness says that when he ran out, she saw this guy who's not actually footless. Looks like he's footless here, but he's got feet. He was wearing a pair of boots. It's really unusual. Had a certain kind of leather banding on the side, so you do some research on this leather banding. You find there's only one manufacturer of this kind of boot. One manufacturer, it's only sold in one store in the entire county, not very popular. Sold about 30 pairs in the last 2 years. Who do you think's got one of those 30 pairs in his house? Our guy. So now our guy's got 1 in 30, 1 in 3, all this homicide activity and threats and all that stuff. And as it turns out, as you were knocking on his door to the search warrant, if you waited another 30 minutes before you knocked on his door, he'd have been dead. Because when you knocked on his door, he was in the middle of writing a suicide note. Because he says in the suicide note that he lost his temper yesterday and did something so horrific, he cannot forgive himself. There's no way to make it right. You shouldn't take it back. You can't take it back. The only thing he can do now is kill himself. But he doesn't say in the note that he killed anybody. How many of you right now think he's guilty? Appreciate it. I'll put a little knife in it. The witness says that when he ran out to the car, he got into a car that she had never seen before. But she was familiar with this kind of car. Because when she was in college, a lot of friends had this car, cars like it. So I said, what is it? What kind of car is it? It's a kind of an ochre or a mustard-colored 1972 Volkswagen Carmen. Do you even know what a Carmen is? Does anybody know what a Carmen is in this room? Oh, that's really sad. Come on, seriously, no one knows what a Carmen is? Okay, so you do all the DMV search, you find out in the state of South Dakota, you've got 2 Carmen Dias that are even operational. And you know what color they are because the DMV record won't tell you that, but as it turns out, when you do the search warrant at his house, he has a yellow 1972 Carmen Dia. Everybody, this is a Carmen Dia. Carmen Dia is everybody. Got it? Now you see how powerful these kinds of cases can be? Now, look, I don't usually have 8-piece cases. I have 78-piece cases. You start building circumstantial cases with lots and lots of pieces that are described in this way, you still resist. We have to ask people, are you the kind of person who has to have every question answered before you make a decision? Because guess what? We don't want you on our jury, either as defense. You have to be in the land of reasonable, not in the land of impossible. It's not the land of possible now, it's becoming reasonable. So we ask the question, is it still possible that he's innocent? Absolutely. He could be the unluckiest guy in the world. On the day he yells at his girlfriend and is so upset with her and smacks her around and says that he's going to kill her, some stranger killed her. Dang, that sucks. The next day he's just suicidal about something else. It's nothing to do with this. But dang, wouldn't you know it? The day before, now it looks like he's guilty. This is really bad luck for this guy, right? Or he's just really guilty. That's the 2 options. And it turns out one is possible, but one is much more reasonable. The defense is going to say, no, I can explain this some other way. I can explain this some other way. I can explain this some other way. Okay, knock yourself out. If I had a 78-piece case, I had to have 78 alternative explanations. Or guess what? There is one unifying cause that explains all the evidence quite simply. It's like Occam's razor. That's why these cases become powerful, because it turns out that one cause can explain all the other. That's how we make cases. And all of my cases are like this. All of them. And honestly, if you go across the country, you'll see that involved in the case of international attention. They don't have anybody who says, yeah, I saw her do it. Those cases they usually do now, not international attention, but two cases. Because one says this, get down, jury goes, you're guilty, he goes. These cases take time. And they're very controversial. The media always says, oh, you know, it's just a circumstantial case. Well, this is how we make cases. We surround the suspect, and the only reasonable inference is that he's guilty. This is a circumstantial case. And by the way, judges tell juries all the time that circumstantial evidence is to be given the exact same authority, the exact same credence as direct evidence. They are to have no difference in your consideration in the jury room. You don't say, well, I got A kind of evidence and B kind of evidence. No, it's all A evidence. Now we're going to turn a corner. We'll talk about using an approach like this as we examine the Gospels. Because the Gospels, if they are what John says at the end of the Gospel of John, he says in 1 John, he claims that these are eyewitness accounts. That a lot more can be written, and but this is what he says he saw. He touched with his own hands, he said, right? So let's take a look at it and see how do we deal with direct evidence. Because I do not think you should leave a witness out of hand. You should test your witness before you believe them. I don't care who it is. So we're going to test witnesses, though, by using a circumstantial approach. That's why I teach you about circumstantial evidence. Now let's turn the corner and talk about how we test witnesses. Witnesses we test in 4 large categories. We tell jurors, if you don't think you can trust this witness, you can ask a series of questions in your head. They all break down into these 4 categories. To make it easier, I'll just give you simple words. We simply want to know. Ask yourself. Examine the witness. Ask yourself, was that witness really there? Can that witness be verified or corroborated in some way? Has that witness changed their story over time? And has that witness got a bias which would incline that witness to lie to us? That's how we examine witnesses. We're going to do the exact same thing now with the gospel authors. Can they pass this test? Now, we can't go through all 4 of these tonight, so I'll send you information on at least a couple of these areas, but we will look up them. And here we go. The first question is, are they present? Is the witness present? Here's a case from 1974. This is my dad. He's walking this guy across the courtyard to the courtroom. And this guy right here has confessed. He's confessed to the murder of a 10-year-old girl on Thanksgiving Day, 1972, 14 months earlier. This guy did about 1,000 pages of confession. I have transcripts, 2 large binders, and I've read through all of them. It took days to confess to the horrific murder of this 10-year-old girl. He confessed in graphic detail. It's bizarre. None of it's true. It wasn't even there. We finally got him out of the case with a Old Beach and blood testing to do back in the 70s. My dad always knew this guy was not our guy, but these 2 detectives were so convinced, and he became so close to them through this confession process that he loved it. He loved being in the center of their world. And so by the time we got him out of our case, we were 14 months behind the killer. It's still cold. This is still an unsolved case. It's the first case I tried to open, working parole case, just so my dad could run on dad's case, right? And I couldn't clear it. Her name was Terry Lynn Hollis, and she's a murder still unsolved. The big issue is, if this guy's not even there, he cannot be a witness or a suspect. He wasn't even there. You've got to ask the same question about the gospel authors. Were they really there early enough to see what they said they saw? Here's the crime scene. Here's the first courtroom where somebody asked the question, which accounts are true? Are the reliable eyewitness accounts? Not that Gospel of Thomas, that's really late, that can't be in. Not Gospel of Philip, that's really late, that can't be in. This council decided which books are in your Bible today. That's a long time, 330 years. This is the council not of Nicaea. That was about the deity of Christ. This is the council of Laodicea. And so, I think if the Gospels are written toward this end of the timeline, you should just get up and go home. Because this is all a joke. If they're written late, they can't be eyewitnesses. Because these people have been dead for 3 centuries before they even start writing. And there's a lot of folks who are doing the work to convince you that this is in fact the case, or that you can't trust the scriptures at all. This is Mike Carter, who's written a lot of books. And if you're in college right now, if you haven't heard Carter, you will. Probably one of the most renowned biblical scholars in the North American continent. Right? Written a lot of scholarly level books books, but he's written a ton of popular books that are very influential. I don't know of any biblical scholar who's written more popular level books. He was raised a Christian in a Christian home, went to the Moody Bible Institute, went to Wheaton College, studied at Princeton Theological Seminary, and one of the foremost biblical scholars of the 20th century named Bruce Metzger. And this guy is not a believer. He writes against Christianity and argues you really can't tell what you don't know what to believe because it changes over time. I talk about the law top of this guy. You think you've lost the truth of Christianity, you don't know what Jesus really said, and you can't even be sure who wrote those darn books. Now, if on the other hand, the gospel writers are writing toward this end of the timeline, then at least we know they were doing it early enough to have been present to be an eyewitness to begin with. They could still be lying, but they're lying early. And that makes a difference, because if you're lying early, when other people are still alive, to know that you're lying, well, they can call you out. That's, oh, I knew Jesus. So if I can show that it's written early, it solves a lot of problems. Or it raises questions. How can I get rid of that lie when I'm writing it during the generation of people who actually saw this stuff? You know, Paul says in 1 Corinthians, you can go out and talk to 500 people who were still alive who saw the resurrection. That's a ballsy statement. I'm sorry, it is. If you're going to say that, it better be true. It takes a lot of guts to say there's still 500 people who are alive and write that in 53 AD. If there aren't really people who are still alive, you can ask. Because people who are reading that for the first time, they're going, that's not like to ask. That's right? So let's take a look at the C's. Is there any good reason to believe that this is written early? You guys are all Sunday school graduates, right? Okay, good. Tell me which book of the Bible includes the description of the destruction of the temple at Jerusalem. Remember, Jesus in Matthew 23 predicts it's going to be destroyed. The book of Acts chronicles all the history after Jesus in the first century. We know that Josephus tells us that he's not a biblical scholar, a Jewish historian, tells us that the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. So is this in the book of Acts? The destruction of the temple? No. It's not in any New Testament book. It's not in the book of Acts. Why wouldn't Luke put it in there? I mean, here you've got Jesus predicting it. Just stick it in there, because at least it shows he's an accurate predictor. Not in there. What about the siege? There's a siege that takes place 2 or 3 years before the destruction of the temple. Terrible siege. They blockaded the city. They starved everybody out. No water, no food. They eventually knocked the walls down and sacked the temple. People suffered. It was horrific, according to Josephus. It was a terrible thing. Does Luke even say anything about it? No. The three major players in the book of Acts are Paul, Peter, and James, the brother of Jesus. As a matter of fact, in chapter 15 of Acts, James is the leader of the Christian council. He's the most important player at that point in history. Now, those three characters, are they alive or dead? We know that Paul was executed right around 64 to 67. We don't have other histories. But in the end of the book of Acts, Paul's not dead. He's still alive. He's in custody in Rome. Why not describe his death? He's one of the major players. Peter's death is not described in the book of Acts either. James died around 61 AD. He's not mentioned in the book of Acts either. Now remember, the book of Acts describes the death of Stephen, a minor player. The death of James, the brother of John, another minor player, died around 44 AD. Those are in the book of Acts. And they're minor players. The three most important players, nothing to mention about it. Why is all that stuff missing from the book of Acts? Yeah, because it hasn't happened yet. So I would put the date in the book of Acts just 1 year ahead of the first missing event. That's conservative, I think. And remember, Luke wrote 2 books, the book of Acts, and then he wrote another book called what? The Gospel of Luke. But he wrote that book first. And he says that in the first chapter of Acts. He says in the first chapter, Theophilus, I wrote my former book about all that Jesus began to do and teach. First 2 until the day he was taken up. So he says he had a former book, and I'm going to put the former book in front of the book of Acts. I put it in front of the book of Acts by 70 years. Why? I think they go earlier, but I'm trying to be conservative. I'll tell you why I put it there. Paul, when he's writing his letters, he wrote a letter to Timothy called 1 Timothy. I love this because in this book of Timothy, he's going to say, the scripture says, he tells Timothy, he reminds Timothy of two pieces of scripture. Look what they are. Do not muzzle the ox while it's treading Deuteronomy, Old Testament. He also says, and the worker deserves his wages. Where is that from? That's not Old Testament. That's New Testament. He's quoting Luke, the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10. That means when he wrote this book in 63 AD, Luke's Gospel had to already be available to him to quote from it. Which makes sense when he was around 10 years earlier. Why 10 years earlier? Because there's another book that Paul writes called 1 Corinthians. He wrote that very early, 57. And in this one, he describes the Lord's Supper. In the Lord's Supper, he says, when Jesus said, this is my body which is given up for you, do this in remembrance of me. Of all the Gospels that record the Lord's Supper, only one uses that language. Again, Paul is quoting Luke's Gospel. He's quoting Luke chapter 22. He's the only person who uses that expression. Nobody else says do this in remembrance of me, just Luke says it. So here we have him quoting Luke's Gospel as early as 53 to 57. That's why he dated 53. He was conservative. One last crazy thing. The first chapter of Luke's Gospel, Luke says this. Before I get to it, I'm going to say one thing. When I was a skeptic, I really wanted to push this. I was really wanting to push the Gospel of Mark especially. Because I heard that Papias in the first century said that Mark was writing from Peter. Peter would describe his dealings with Jesus in Rome, and Mark would write this stuff down, and it became Mark's Gospel. And Papias in the first century said that Mark was being very careful about accuracy, but not so careful about order. So Mark's Gospel is kind of like the anecdotes of Jesus, but not necessarily in the right order, according to Papias in the first century. I remember spending probably about 4 months just doing a forensic statement analysis on the Gospel of Mark to see if that was really true. Are Peter's fingerprints in the Gospel of Mark? I have a whole chapter over today. The point is, this is interesting. Here, what Luke says. Luke says that the opposite, and therefore, since I myself have carefully investigated, he's not an eyewitness. Luke tells you that. He's just a detective talking to the eyewitnesses. Got it? So he says that I carefully investigated everything from the beginning. It seemed good also to me to write an orderly account for you, the most excellent Theophilus, the same guy who he's writing from the book of Acts. But what kind of an account did he call it? He called it an orderly account. Why would he call it an orderly account? Because he knows there's an account that he's drawing from that's not orderly, called the Gospel of Mark. And as a matter of fact, the one Gospel that he quotes more than any other Gospel in his account is the Gospel of Mark. He's just saying, I'm putting it in the right order. So you have now a Gospel that precedes Luke, and most scholars wouldn't put it that way. But look at how close it is to the timeline. Within 12 to 15 years of the actual events. So the issue of are they present, I think, was resolved for me. But it doesn't mean they're not lying. It just means they're writing it pretty early. There's a whole second section when we talk about the corroboration. I have 6 levels of corroboration that I looked at, both internal and external. 2 different talks. I spoke to you all night. I'm not going to bore you with that. But I will send you everything I looked at. And it's all touch point corroboration. How do we corroborate an event? A witness tells you something. How do you even corroborate it to begin with? There are certain rules. So I'll send you all that stuff. Tonight we're going to skip to the other part that, as a skeptic, I always suspected. Because when I discovered how early it was written, I said, well, there's still a problem. I know these miracles can't be true. I know that miracle stuff cannot be true. So even if it was written early, then I guarantee you it's been changed over time. I guarantee you the first version of Jesus was a simple teacher who didn't work any miracles. And then over time, the Christians came in and tinkered with the story and created the legendary Jesus. I was sure of that. So we're going to talk about that. Is it accurate over time? Remember I told you about that 1981 case? It's on Dateline from last March. It's still online. I can see it. Pretty cool story. But this guy killed his wife. That's not cool. And he killed his wife and he got rid of the body. And he convinced their family that she had run off. And they believed him for 30 years. The police believed him for 6. By the time we started working the case, we were 6 years behind it. We didn't have a crime scene. I couldn't tell you how he killed her, where he killed her, why he killed her, what he did with her body, how he moved her car. I couldn't answer any of these questions. But I did know this. his story about it changed over time significantly. He told one story in 1981. He wasn't interviewed again for 6 years, and he told almost a completely different story. Why? Because he's not looking at his mind's eye and remembering. Because he can't remember, he's lying. And he can't remember his first lie. He wasn't interviewed again until 1996, third lie. 2002, fourth lie. 2010, fifth lie. He got himself in trouble over time. So whether someone's been accurate over time is super important. Now think about this. We've got to ask ourselves a question. How do we know that this story of Jesus wasn't messed with over time before it got here? It's kind of like working a crime scene. Eventually you're going to go to court. What if I had a piece of evidence at the crime scene? I'll put these in. Here's a casing. How do I know that casing was really there? When I finally get to court and I've got a casing in court, how do I know that casing was really part of the crime scene? How do I know that the marks that are so important on the casing to me weren't put in later? How do I know if those marks that I see now were actually there back then? I mean, it's quite possible that somebody could have just dropped this thing into the property years later. It wasn't even at the crime scene. And the next person coming along doesn't know any better. They unsuspectingly work it like it's a real piece of evidence. They pass it off to the next guy. Years later, we trot it into court, and it was never even at the crime scene. OJ. That was one of the accusations on OJ. Now let's think about this. Could something similar have been done here? Well, suppose I have the Gospel of John. Takes a little picture of Jesus, writes it all out. That's great. But how do I know that that's the same thing that we are looking at years later when we're formalizing the canon? How do I know that people along the way didn't make changes? Could it happen once or 1,000 times? And by the time we get to some point in history, people who don't know any better just assume it's true. We're in. There you go. It's all a lie. I'll tell you how we handle it up here. So I think we'll help you understand how we handle it here. Here, what I do is I ask myself a question. Is there anyone at the crime scene who took a picture or wrote a report about the casing? An officer. Sometimes they used to take Polaroids. Do you guys even know what a Polaroid is? How many of you, honestly, to be honest, don't know what a Polaroid is? Okay, raise your hand. You don't be lying. Raise your hand. Most of you don't know what a Polaroid is. Okay, so the point is, that, you know, these are Polaroids, the old-fashioned Polaroids. You probably know this kind of Polaroid, right? That's the other kind of Polaroid. You don't know this one, I should know. You never see that pull off the tongue and shake. Don't touch it, just shake it. How about this one? We used to put the solution on the photograph so it would develop. That's how old it is. I have all kinds of old photographs in my cases. All right? So in this old photograph, we can at least see, maybe you didn't take the photograph, but you wrote a really good report. You described it really thoroughly. That would be cool too. One or the other. And then he's going to give it to somebody who's going to check it in from this guy. If we write another report, taking the Polaroid, he brings it to the crime lab. Now the first time we're taking 35mm film, now with the digital. Taking pictures, examining it, testing it, writing more reports. He can be a little detective who writes a report to receive it. He brings it to the courtroom. That's called the chain of custody. And the defense attorneys will kill you if your chain of custody is not good. You have a speech you're about to stand, right? And I'm about ready to have one of those cases where I'm prepared to take a meeting. But that's just the way it is sometimes in the whole case if you can't control it, because people before you even came on the department, right? That's called the chain of custody. Is there something similar that we could do here? Is there a chain of custody in the New Testament? No, there actually is. So let's take a look at it. We say the crime scene was used as a ministry, the courtroom and the council. Who's the first officer on scene? Well, somebody says, John says, he's the first officer on scene. And we know he dates pretty early, all these date pretty early. He takes a picture of Jesus, he writes a report called the Gospel of John. But how do I know what it really said? I got to go to the second officer of the crime scene. He had 3 students, Ignatius, Papias, and Polycarp. We know about them because they actually wrote their own letters. Because these 3 guys became leaders in the early church. And as leaders in the early church, they wrote letters to their own congregations. So they took a picture of Jesus based on what John told them, another picture, and they wrote it out, and I can read it because there's 7 surviving letters from Ignatius. And in those 7 surviving letters, he quotes all of the New Testament gospels. and a bunch of letters of Paul. Don't let anyone tell you those are late letters and late gospels, because the first line of officers are already quoting them. And unfortunately, the gospel of Atheist is what we don't have. But we do have one surviving letter from Polycarp, just the Church of Philippi. And in that letter, he quotes the New Testament Gospels and all the letters of Paul too, all these letters. So we've got a snapshot of Jesus here, and we've got a snapshot of Jesus here, and they had a student named Irenaeus. Ignatius and Polycarp did. So Irenaeus is a picture of Jesus as he was taught by these guys. As a matter of fact, he wrote so much that he even made a list of the books that he was using with his congregation. So we don't think for a second that this church council decided what the canon was. They just acknowledged that it had been being used for 200 years. So using the gospel of canon very early. And he's writing about it, mentioning all those books. And then his student is Hippolytus. And Hippolytus does the same thing. Unfortunately, Hippolytus got some problem with the Pope. And so he got spanked a little bit, sent to the mines, and he died in custody. Okay? No student of Hippolytus. Can't go any further because that's kind of bad. But I can go through the other authors of the Bible and do the same thing. From Paul through Linus and Clement, he mentions in his letters, Clement became an early leader of the church. He wrote a letter called First Clement. All with dictation, but it still stopped short. Or from Peter through Mark, the North African bishops of the school of Africa in North Africa, and all with Eusebius in the council. So we can take a look at the snapshots of Jesus in the chain of custody. My question is, if it's early, I figure for sure it's got to have been changed. But it turns out it hasn't been changed at all. If you were to lose everything in the New Testament and lost the work of those three authors, and all you had left was the work of their students, you would know everything about Jesus you know today, from the virgin birth, through all of his miracles, his teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, all the way to the resurrection. Every word that's used to describe him, his claims of deity, it's all in there. It's not a late addition. It's there from the very, very beginning. So the kind of Jesus that Mark and other skeptics don't like, you're stuck with the miracle worker who claimed to be God and rose from the dead. That God is still there. Make sense? Now, the last one we're going to talk about tonight is bias. How do we know we can trust these folks when, after all, they are Christians? Why should I trust the Christians? Sometimes when you do like domestic violence calls, you get to a call, right, and you got a guy and a gal together. You get there, and he's all cut up, and she's all cut up and bruised. And she says, he started, he smacked me, see? He says, but no, she started. She cut me with her nail right here, see right there? And it's a big fight. I want him to go to jail. I want her to go to jail. He started it. She started it. What do? I mean, there's a bias here. Each person wants the other person to go to jail. What am I supposed to do with that? You know what I do? Everyone goes to jail. You do. Because you really can't figure it out. There's a bias involved. So what? I have the same problem here. How many of you have thought about bias? If you thought about what motivates people to do something wrong, there are only three motives behind any murder. Only three. And there's subsets. There are only three motives behind any sin. Anything you've ever done wrong is only because of one of these three motives. And they are three motives. What causes you to be angry? First one is financial greed. Financial greed. A lot of murders occur because of a money issue. Right? Want that money. The second one is sexual or relational lust. That gets people in a lot of trouble. The third one's a little harder. It's the pursuit of power. And that looks a little different sometimes. Sometimes it's like, hey, don't put my name in and disrespect me. That's a power issue. Okay? But it's always these three. And there are no others. Everything is a subset after these three. So when you walk into a death scene, and a murder scene, I simply ask myself, okay, where in this victim's life is there somebody redeeming one of those three areas? That's why I do it. Because those are the only three moments. Now, there's another option, of course, just crazy. Okay? And crazy people own the most. They're just, see the difference? If you're not crazy, you need a motive. Got it? So let me ask you a question. What is the motive here for the 12? If they're going to be doing this heinous thing, lying about the story of Jesus, I think it's easy to say, well, gosh, it's probably not financial because none of them got rich. And it's probably not about sexual because none of them got lucky. So the question is it really about power, the pursuit of power? Now, some people will say, well, yeah, they became leaders in their own groups, at least. Really? You read the letters of Paul? Paul's constantly arguing for his authority as an apostle. Hey, I'm an apostle to who? You see a lot of that in his letters. He came and see the consideration of his own group. And read the first part of Corinthians and see you suffer. What happened to Paul? It's like those two deer in that Far Side commercial. One deer's talking to the other deer. The second deer's got a big bullseye on his fur pattern on his chest. And the first deer says, man, I'm a birthmark, Al. Right? And it's like the disciples, by even opening their mouths, all they did was put a huge bullseye. There's a big difference between fame and infamy, okay? These folks didn't even have the power to control the way they were executed. They couldn't even stop their own martyrdom. What exactly did they gain in the areas of money, relational or sexual lust, or the pursuit of power? What is motivating this problem? I do a talk just on what creates a successful conspiracy. By the way, the elements of successful conspiracies are also missing. And instead, these folks all died these horrific deaths, and some are better tested than others, to hold on to this claim. They didn't want to recant their claim. And none of them gained in these areas. And if you just study any, I don't care whose side of the story you look at. If you look at the Christian side of the story or any other ancient side of the story, you will not find any story of Matthew sitting martyrs on the closest thing. You're going to find it. The only record we have is a great grandmother. All because they refused to change their story. I have 6 brothers and sisters who are all LDS. My dad remarried and my family all one on that side. He's not a believer, he's an atheist. But he's married to a Mormon. And if you look at the witnesses to the Golden Plates, Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, Martin Harrison, those 3 men did not even stay Mormon. They left them. These folks died for this claim. This is something you got to consider. We'll stop with this. You can't trust the Gospels because they were written by Christians. You can trust other histories, Josephus, or Tacitus, or Thales, or Suetonius, but you can't trust Christians. They like Jesus. Of course they're going to say something nice about Jesus. They're friends of Jesus. You can't trust what they say. That's just a stupid claim. I have to help you kind of sort through. We'll do it by showing you a robbery. This robbery, this guy is going to do a robbery. He's doing it right now. He already showed the teller the demand note and the gun. Without saying a word, he's able to get her to give him all that money. She had a demand note and a gun pointed at her. The demand note away, the gun's away, and she's giving him the money. Now what's interesting about it is when he first walked in the room, first walked in the bank, the person who was behind the assistant manager's desk recognized him. Her name was Kathy, she said back here. And she recognized him because they went to high school. Poor guy, one bank in high school. They wasn't even close to their hometown, so he just got hung. But he was so busy in the bank that she did not want to interview. She was online, she was with a customer, she couldn't be away from the customer. She figured if he's done with this transaction, she would say hello. But as he's doing the transaction, she looks up at her coworker, and her coworker has the look on her face like, I'm being robbed. She's seen that before. And Kathy was shocked. I know she was shocked because it says so on the slide. No, she was shocked because she had known this guy since they were in high school. And this guy, and she told us later, was the sweetest guy, super smart, great grades, really good athlete, a student leader, a student body president, not president, but leader of the student body. And she said, if I was going to make a list of all the people I knew from high school who were with the bank robbery, this guy would be the bottom of the list. So yeah, I was shocked. Now, do you think after the crime's all over, I should go to talk to her about what she saw? I mean, she's shocked because he wants to steal again. But I don't even think, I mean, if you're not, think of this the way that some of the people who object to the gospel being written by Christians, you really couldn't go to her as an authority on this, because look, she now is convinced that Robert Smith is the bank robber. In essence, you could say that she's a Robert Smith. You can't go to a Robert Smith and ask about Robert Smith. You can't trust anything a Robert Smith will write about Robert Smith. Do you see how stupid that is? And it's silly because she didn't start off thinking that Robert Smith was a bank robber. She ended up thinking that Robert Smith was a bank robber based on her observations. It's very different to start off with a bias or to end up with a conclusion on the basis of observations. So I think she actually is reliable because she ended up somewhere. In the same way that the gospel writers, I think, were equally reliable because they didn't start off. You think Matthew started off thinking Jesus was the Messiah? Remember how he met Matthew? He was a tax collector when he met Matthew. After 3 years of watching that stuff, he was in. He was convinced. Sorry, if he would have been there to see, he might have been convinced too. And now he's writing stories about Jesus, but not because he had a bias beforehand, because he had a conviction afterward. See the difference? So we started off with this guy, and we asked him to trust anything he says, and I think that really, if you look at the evidence, it's not that trustworthy. But we examined the case about Christianity, and look, I'm trying to give you, in what, 45 minutes, everything I got from 288 pages of work. It's going to be hard to do. We try our best. But I think it was the early reading of this, and it's quoted and verified. We didn't talk about any verification tonight. We didn't talk about the descriptions offered by pagans in the first century. We didn't talk about any of that stuff tonight. We didn't even talk about how it's transmitted. So that's actually pretty stuff. We didn't talk at least about how they are attested. Okay? So we didn't talk about 3 out of the 5 things, but we're building a case the same way we build a case against a suspect. We surround the issue with what we think is the best evidence, and we let people decide. This seems to me the same kind of work that the other case does. It points to a conclusion. So that when I ask the questions of Jesus, can I trust this guy? I think I come out with a different answer. Because I think I've got a good record. Now look, here's the problem with the record in Scripture. And if you're in this room right now and you're a skeptic, I get it. You're a skeptic more than I've been a Christian. More than a Christian for 17 years. So I can tell you that I understand what it is to be skeptical. And for me, I was always skeptical about the presence of the supernatural. Flat out, period. I'm pretty committed, even now, I struggle with being a pretty committed philosophical naturalist. It's hard for me to accept supernatural descriptions. It really is. But if you're beginning an investigation to discover if something supernatural exists, you can't start from the position of denying anything supernatural. That'll kill your investigation right away. I remember I had a case one time where I walked in the room and my partner was 15 years senior to me. He said, find a boyfriend. My friend did this, and she was not naked on the bed. So yeah, that counts as a boyfriend killing, right? And she had on the nightstand a picture of her with another guy. In the closet, what woman in the closet only uses half of it? Only had half of the closet filled. The other closet, outside of the closet, had one men's jacket. Where's his clothes? So you find that guy, that's her boyfriend. That's going to be your cover. He was so committed to this. He says, I know I've done 1,000 of these, and I'm thinking, let's do some fingerprint stuff, and now I want to do all the new detective stuff. That was a brand new detective. He was like, dude, I've been here 1,000 times, and you do all you want, I'm telling you this is going to be a boyfriend. You find that guy in the picture. We're good to go. It was not a boyfriend. She didn't have a boyfriend. He was a neighbor. Just a neighbor that lived next door. Killed her. We wasted at least a week. Why? Because he was determined from the onset that he was looking for a certain kind of answer. You can't do that. So if you're looking at the issue of whether or not there is a supernatural thing called God, you can't begin by rejecting anything supernatural. Instead, you just suspend that for a second and just follow the evidence real quick. Without the supernatural elements, nobody would doubt anything about the reliability of Scripture. It's just the existence of the supernatural that causes doubt to begin with. So ask yourself the question, what is that? For me, it was about ability. And for my dad, it's about ability. I had to ask myself the question at some point, is there enough evidence here? Is that what's stopping you, Jim? Or is it that you don't want there to be enough evidence? Is that what's stopping you, Jim? And I was in that second category. Now I'm going to challenge you before I go. Sometimes we get in youth groups like this, even Cru and varsity other groups on campus, and it's really easy to spend our time worshiping God in some way other than with our minds. But in the end,